Absolutely. Well, I guess let's start at 30,000 feet. Talk to me about the recent deportation, the Venezuelans, the TDA gang members. Give us a sort of an overview of how that took place, and then we can kind of dive into the degree to which those sort of actions are going to be stopped by the judges.
So generally, when aliens are deported from the United States, they're deported under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA, or Title 8, as the Biden administration would refer to it. And, that's the baseline of laws that we use to determine who can come in, who should be sent away, and, who should be allowed to stay. But with respect to the Tren de Aragua members who were sent by the Trump administration to El Salvador, those individuals were actually expelled under a different authority, the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a law that was passed during a period of time when France was in the throes of a revolution and the United States was afraid that it was going to get dragged into that war. And it allows the president to detain and deport individuals who are nationals of countries with which we're at war, or alternatively, individuals who have invaded the United States. And the president's contention is that Tren de Aragua is such a well organized criminal cartel, transnational criminal organization, that they function sort of as a state, and also that they have ties to the regime of Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro. And thus, the president concludes that the authorities in the Alien Enemies Act are sufficient to allow him to take those Tren de Aragua members and send them outside the United States. Now, he didn't
What,
send them to Venezuela.
what do you think? Is that a correct interpretation?
I think it's definitely an authority that the president has. I think that it's appropriate for him to make a determination. He knows a whole lot more about how Tren de Aragua operates and what relationship they have with the socialist government in Venezuela than most of the American people do. And Mike, most of that information is, highly sensitive information, law enforcement sensitive stuff, national security related information. And in fact, national security has been one of those things that's come up in the court case against this. So, it's, I'm not going to say it's a stretch, but it's definitely a novel interpretation of the Alien Enemies Act, which I think was last used during World War II when certain German, Italian, and primarily Japanese Americans were sent to internment camps. Now, again, none of these people are being detained in the United States. They're being sent out of the United States.
And that then leads to all sorts of questions. Like in the aftermath of this, even while the planes were reportedly still in the air, there was obviously a ruling from I believe a trial judge who said nope, can't do it. Turn those flights around, bring them back to the states. Now, does that? I mean, I guess we're dipping into all sorts of legal issues here, but the White House, it was interesting. They came back and said, "Well, I'm sorry, but a trial judge doesn't have authority over foreign policy decisions," which is how they couched this when they started seeing the legal pushback. To what degree do you think it's appropriate for the justice system to step in? I mean, we are talking about something that hasn't been invoked for what you pointed out, 80 years or so.
Yeah, the judge in question is Judge Jeb Boasberg, who's the chief judge of the District Court for the District of Columbia. And he is considering a lawsuit, a challenge to the president's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport individuals from the United States. And generally, when the judiciary gets involved in any situation like this, the first thing that they do is tell everybody to just stop, hold on, so that the court has the opportunity to determine what's going on. He issued a temporary restraining order, which is, that sort of just stop for a moment so I can figure it out. But as it relates to the foreign policy of the United States and Judge Boasberg's order, it gets into a question that the Trump administration had to deal with the first time around, and that is nationwide or universal injunctions. Generally, when you go into a court of law, you're arguing your case on behalf of yourself. Apparently, none of the people who are actually parties to that suit were removed from the United States. The individuals who were removed from the United States were a larger class of individuals who weren't actually named parties. So, the pushback from the Trump administration in part has to do with those universal jurisdictions, particularly given the fact that apparently these planes were outside of U.S. airspace and therefore outside of the United States. But, whenever the president attempts to, use any of these novel authorities, he's going to get pushback. The question is how quickly the courts can move. The first time around, courts didn't move very quickly. And so a lot of Trump administration policies were simply sidelined indefinitely. This time around, the administration's interested in having everything move a lot more quickly, having the courts issue decisions, or alternatively not act at all and just let things proceed while the dust settles. So we're going to see how that ends up. All of this is going to the Supreme Court.
Okay, yeah, that seems where it's headed. Look, if you could, I suppose, argue. Now, an attorney, but I have watched a lot of attorney shows on TV, and you could argue, I suppose, that once those deportees, say you've got a two plane loads of TDA gang members, once they leave U.S. airspace, right, they're not, U.S. citizens by any stretch of the imagination. So they're out of jurisdiction of U.S. courts, and so therefore, once they're sitting in a prison in El Salvador, the U.S. justice system, you could argue, doesn't have any sway over what happens to them.
Yeah, that's certainly the position that the Trump administration is making. That, courts don't get to decide foreign policy, courts don't get to decide defense policy. So when it comes to certain, critical, plenary powers that the president has, the power of the judiciary is extremely limited. And in fact, even the Supreme Court has found that in the past in some very, high profile cases. So, yeah, I mean, the idea that a federal judge has the ability to order the United States government to return a person who's not a United States citizen from a prison that's not run by the United States definitely, wades into some novel legal issues. Again, that's why I said the Supreme Court's ultimately going to have to decide this because, short term, no solution is going to make everybody happy. And, they're the Supreme Court, not because they're the best, but because they're the last.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.